Everything in the sunnah, it actually doesn't just benefit us in the akhirah, it benefits us in the dunya as well.
Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Allahumma salli wa sallim wa barak ala Sayyidina Muhammad. I'm your host, Dr. Rend, and I am excited to introduce our guest for today's program. Dr. Nour Akhras is a pediatric infectious disease physician and hospitalist who's been working at a freestanding women and children's hospital in the suburbs of Chicago for the last decade. She has traveled on multiple medical missions to serve Syrian refugees in Turkey and Greece, as well as displaced victims of war in Yemen. She has served on the boards of NGOs like Med Global and the Syrian American Medical Society. Dr. Akhras has advocated for the rights of refugees by authoring op-eds in local and national newspapers and via speaking engagements, including presenting at Washington, D.C.'s National Press Club, discussing the effects of Syrian war violence on the lives of women and children. Her most recent work is a book titled Just One, A Journey of Perseverance and Conviction that was just released earlier this year. As the Syrian crisis continues in its 12th year, she continues to advocate for peaceful change such that the 6 million Syrian refugees displaced throughout the world can find a path home, inshallah. Well, Dr. Nour Akhras, thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to have you.
Thank you for inviting me, Rend.
My pleasure. So, Nour, one of the things I wanted to kind of start with before we get to some of the exciting things regarding your new book and your relief work, as a pediatric infectious disease specialist, you played a very special role during the pandemic. And one of the ways that I interacted with you that was very meaningful to me was, as some people know, I co-founded a school, an Islamic school in the Chicago suburbs called the Carriers of Light. So during the time when we were trying to get the children back into the classroom and go back into some version of live schooling during the pandemic, you were the person that I consulted with as a pediatric infectious disease specialist to get a lot of advice on that. And then when incidents arose and specific issues came up, we reached out to you, and mashallah, you consulted with us pro bono. I know you were probably doing that for a lot of other organizations and giving a lot of your time towards that. And I just kind of wanted to talk to you a little bit about how that experience was for you during a time that was already stressful for you as a person, as it was for all of us, as a physician in your work, as a mother, as a person who has a family to worry about. And then in addition to that, selflessly serving your community in a way that I'm sure took a lot of time and energy from you. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Well, I mean, as you mentioned, as a physician, it was stressful dealing with a new pathogen. As a mother, it was stressful. Thinking about like my children staying home from school, as a lot of parents had to deal with, and then just seeing some of the ramifications of like a autoimmune process that was happening to children. So a lot of children weren't necessarily getting super sick with COVID, but that autoimmune process that happened after COVID called multisystem inflammatory syndrome in children that was discovered kind of later on in the pandemic. So worrying about my children getting that. So it was very stressful. But when it came to the community reaching out and different people reaching out and asking, my thoughts or consulting, and other schools, not just Carriers of Light, but like Aqsa School and others, asking about advice. I always think about knowledge the way we think about money in Islam. I think that, as we have to pay our share of zakah and then we use our sadaqah to kind of purify our money, our wealth, I think about knowledge as in the same light that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave me this knowledge, and to give back. It's not my knowledge, like He gave it to me or He gave me that opportunity. It's only right that I share or that I use it to help other people. And so I've never been in a situation where somebody's asked me about an infectious disease in their child or another medical condition in their child where I've said like, no, I can't help you, or like take it to your pediatrician. I've always tried to answer to the best of my ability. And even when I see my patients, like I always treat them the way that I would think that I would treat my children. Like the plan or the antibiotics or whatever I recommend, the way I think about them is the ways that I would think about my own child. Like if my child had this disease, what would I do? What would I want done? And that's the plan that I recommend to people. And it's the same when the pandemic hit and people were asking like, should I do this? Should I do that? I always thought about it like, this is not my knowledge. This is, something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave to me. And it's only right that I share, or, you know, I'm not trying to keep anything to myself. Like it's like I don't own it, you know. So that's always the way that I've kind of looked at medical knowledge or any other knowledge that I have.
That's really interesting. I mean, I think I've never thought of it in exactly that way, but I think that really resonates with me also as a physician myself. And I don't serve pediatric patients. I serve patients that are for the most part older than me in ophthalmology. That tends to be my patient population. And I always think the same way as you, that if this were one of my parents, how would I want them to be treated, or how would I treat them? And I really try to operate under that premise, regardless of who walks in or who the patient is. I try to keep that objectively the same for everybody. And I think that it's a beautiful thing if we can do that. It really makes our practice of medicine very special, I think very heartfelt in a different way. So alhamdulillah that you're able to do that for your patients. So that's really interesting to think of, the way that we give back in terms of knowledge. As I shared with you, the theme of this podcast is finding happiness and well-being through prayer, purpose, and people. And I think when it comes to sharing your knowledge, that falls obviously under purpose, but definitely in your work with people, that's a big part of what allows us to give back, is that there are people who want to be the recipients of whatever it is that we're sharing. And my experience doing relief work overseas was something that really changed me, because I realized that we are the ones who, it seems like we're the ones doing this great thing because we're going overseas and we're giving back in terms of our medical knowledge and our expertise, or whatever way that we might be helping. But if it weren't for the fact that there were people who needed our help, then we wouldn't really have anything to give. If that makes sense. It's kind of like when you're giving charity, you're grateful to the person who's a willing recipient of your charity. Otherwise, who would you give charity to, and how would you get the reward and benefit of that? So I would love to hear a little bit about how doing relief work overseas has sort of shaped your perspective on life, your sense of purpose, and how that's impacted your overall sense of happiness or well-being in your own life when you get back home from those experiences.
Yeah, I mean, my relief work also has changed the trajectory of my life. I definitely don't think I would be the person I am today had I not gone on those missions. And there is something so addicting about them, I guess you could say, that it just pulls you back. Even though I've had so many other experiences in life that people would say gave them a spiritual high, quote unquote, or just beautiful experiences. Like I'm alhamdulillah, I'm so blessed and lucky to have grown up in a relatively financially well-off family. And I've traveled a lot before I got married, after I got married, and I've just had a lot of like great experiences, alhamdulillah. But these relief missions have been undoubtedly the most beautiful experiences of my lifetime, the most gratifying, whether medically or spiritually or in any other way. They've been the most gratifying experiences of my lifetime. And I thought about that a lot. Like, why is that? Like, it's such a weird thing to say, that, oh, I went and traveled into a refugee camp and it was so spiritually gratifying, more than Hajj, more than going to spiritual experiences where I've like studied abroad for a month or 2 months or whatever. And I really think it's because of that hadith. There's that hadith Qudsi that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, says on the day of judgment, will say to the son of Adam, oh, so and so, I was sick, why didn't you visit me? And the person will say, oh, my Lord, like, how could I visit you? How could you be sick? How was I supposed to visit you? And he'll say that so and so was sick. Had you visited him, you would have found me there. And I just think that experience of really finding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with people who are in need is so real. And even if you like think about like today, in the bombings in Gaza, I've been following a physician named Dr. Ghassan Abu Sitta for a while, and he is a London-based reconstructive surgeon who actually volunteered with MSF just in the beginning of the crisis. Like as soon as I think October 7th or October 8th, he went into Gaza and he was there for over a month. And he would send out these messages on Instagram being like, I feel at peace now. Like, this is a guy who's living under bombardment, and he's sending out messages saying, I feel at peace now. And I really think that that's because, like, you know, from the outside, it seems like these people, their lives are being shattered, and they are. Their lives are being shattered. Their homes are being bombed, and they're becoming amputees or orphans. And but I think that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala really takes care of them in a different way. And so when you are there taking care of them, also, you feel that divine presence that you don't feel anywhere else or in any other experience. So I just think that that's why it's so gratifying and so uplifting spiritually, because you really do feel that you feel Allah's presence that you don't feel in other spaces and places. And I know Allah's everywhere, and I know we know that, and that when He's closer to us than our jugular vein. And when you're in sujood, like, you feel His presence, or when you're praying at night alone, you feel His presence. But in those experiences, it's so much more heightened, I think.
Yeah, subhanallah. I mean, I think I've always tried, as you have, to live a life of purpose. And I think choosing to become physicians and all the sacrifices that entailed, especially as women, and for me, and I don't know what stage you were in. I'll ask you about it shortly, but I was in a stage of life where I had gotten married in medical school and had a baby in my first year of internship. So during those years of residency, I had a small baby at home. So all of the sacrifices that we did, for me, it was driven by this sense of purpose, of wanting to do something that I felt allowed me to help other people in a very special and important way. And all of these years that I've practiced medicine, I've received a lot of fulfillment and joy from that. However, it really wasn't until I did overseas relief work that, just as you've described, I had this profound sense of what it means to live a life of purpose. And I felt a feeling that was very different than anything I had felt before. And I couldn't really put it into words. I think it is intangible in many ways, and maybe for the reasons that you've described, because there's a spiritual component, and there's sort of this metaphysical element that maybe we can't put into words. But it was that inspired me to reflect on my life and on what are the things in my life that gave me an actual sense of joy. And that's when I came up with this idea of prayer, purpose, and people. And the purpose piece, and even the prayer and the people piece, a lot of it was really inspired by that kind of work. And it's interesting that, and I think many of us have felt that. And as you've said, it does become, I guess, kind of addictive, because some of the people that have gone on the trips that I've gone on go all the time. They just keep going back and going back and going back. And then you develop relationships, and you also you experience it a little bit differently each time you go, and you meet different people, and you have different experiences. So I would say I definitely resonate with that. I'd be curious to see if there's maybe a story or an experience you would like to share with us that really sticks with you.
One of the first women that I met in Turkey, I still remember her, and it's been like 12 years. I remember her piercing green eyes. I remember how I felt like, oh my God, that, like, I could have been her, or she could have been me. Like, there's no reason that I'm going to go back to my nice house in Ann Arbor and she's going to stay in this refugee camp. And there were many women that I felt like that, but with her, she just, I write about her in the book a little bit, that she was at the end of my first day in Turkey, and she was like, I just want to show you something. And she wanted to show me her living space. And she had chosen to live, there was a choice between staying in the tents or staying in a warehouse, and she had chosen the warehouse because she thought it was closer to the bathrooms. And so a lot of times in refugee camps, there's a lot of gastroenteritis or vomiting, diarrhea that spreads so quickly because of the lack of hygiene. And she thought that if she was closer to the bathroom, then her kids would have access to the bathroom more. And, just thinking about, like, she had lost her husband, and now she was the breadwinner, or the head of the household of 5 children. And, like, she never expected something like this to happen. And I think, like, when we live in the United States or other Western nations, we think that all of that conflict is over there and that would never happen to us. But as we Syrians know, like, Syrians didn't expect that to happen to them either. Like, Syria was so stable in some ways, with the with the government, the Assad government. Like nobody thought anything was going to happen to them because they were in power for so long. And so just to think that in a split second, or just in a matter of days or moments, your life can be turned upside down and you end up a refugee. It was just, I think that really shattered not my sense of security, but just shattered I don't know, my thoughts about life, and just like how things can change so quickly, and how we should really just be so grateful for what we have and what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us, but also be prepared that that could leave at any moment.
Yeah, I think it makes you try to feel less attached to everything that's around you. And it made me reflect a lot on what are the things wrapped up in my identity, how I see myself. Is it because I'm a doctor, or because I'm a mom, or because I'm a wife, or because I live a certain socioeconomic status, or I'm in a certain country, or whatever it may be, all the things that can be so easily ripped away from you, much more easily than we realize. And as being Syrian American, also myself, I remember as kids, we used to spend our summers in Syria, and my family's from Damascus. And Damascus, it was a nice, bustling, safe city for the most part. We never saw any conflict in our whole life while we were there. And all of our friends in America when they figured out that we weren't in Siberia, which is what many of them thought, when they found out that actually it was the Middle East, they would always say, well, isn't it dangerous there? And we were like, what, why? Like, we didn't, that's not how we saw it. And I think what I'm getting at is that I think that people who live comfortably in the West, especially in America, and which, America is geographically distant from other places, but it's also distant in the sense that there's not a lot of people have knowledge of they haven't visited or lived in the Middle East. And especially when I was growing up and when you were growing up, and I think that was, it was just like this big black hole that people didn't know about. So they had certain stereotypes and assumptions. And one of them is exactly what you said, which is that it's just a war-torn place and everybody there is just used to war and conflict, just like some people might ignorantly assume the entire continent of Africa is a particular way, and so when you hear about these crises or these refugees or these wars, from that perspective, you're thinking of it like, well, that's just what's expected to happen to those kinds of people. We just expect that those kinds of people live like that. Whereas for us, when we go there, we actually identify with them as human beings, very similar to ourselves, frighteningly similar, such that it really does make you reevaluate your life. It makes you reevaluate your priorities. It makes you reflect on your own identity, and the way that you are actively pursuing your own life and your own akhirah, from day to day.
And I think that, like, the war in Ukraine too, I mean, yeah, I've said this a lot in the past year that, we in the United States had been hearing the saber rattling about the war coming to Ukraine, in January, right before February occurred, before the Russian troops invaded. And, it was on NPR or CNN or whatever, wherever you get your news. And then if you talk to people in Ukraine in February, they will also say, like, we never thought this would happen to us. And I think that's a common thread for people who become refugees. Like, even Sudan. I have a teacher from Sudan who I really love, and she's here in the United States. And when I asked her about the crisis in Sudan, and I said, did you think this was going to happen? She said, never, never. So I think that it's like a common thread that people don't expect things like that to happen to them. And so for us to kind of put our heads in the sand and think like, oh, well, we live in the United States and that's never going to happen. Even if we think about January 6th, for example, like, how close did this country come to a civil war? I mean, even now they keep saying we're more polarized than we've ever been, and it's true. And so I just think it just gives that perspective, like you don't know, and just because you live in a certain place, that doesn't mean that something like that will never happen to you. And it's not right to think like, oh, that just happens to those people because they're always in conflict, and it's not true.
Yeah. And how, from your experiences and how that's impacted you, how would you then maybe advise or speak to others in terms of their own life, how they might look differently upon the way that they live their own life. Have you had an experience that where maybe you've shared advice with somebody based on what you've experienced?
Not necessarily, but I remember like when I've gone on several of these missions, uh, Dr. Zahar specifically, Dr. Zahar Sahel, he would like joke with us, on these missions, saying that, the Prophet ﷺ told us, "Ikhshawshinu," like you should experience some difficulty sometimes because you should have that experience so that if it ever happens to you, that you know how to live. So like I just always appreciate that my parents had taken me and my sister to Hajj at an early age, and like learning to use the bathrooms, in the Middle East, or learning to use a bathroom that's not where you sit down, but you have to squat and use like a hole in the ground. That was a very useful experience. That was a very useful tool for life in general. So just having these experiences every once in a while. Like I worry about my kids because I don't think they've ever had these kinds of experiences, and probably that's our fault as parents. Like we've never thrown them into these kind of experiences where they've had to like not sit in a nice clean bathroom, for example, or you know what I'm saying, or like go for long periods of time without food or water, or so it's just, I think that it's just important to have these kinds of experiences so you don't shut down if God forbid something happened to you like that was so life altering like that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people might hear this conversation and think, well, I can't just leave my life and go overseas and do relief work, or I'm not a doctor, or I don't have those skills. I hear these things from people. It is hard. It's hard to leave everything. We know we have jobs and we have families. It's really hard to leave everything and go. But I would say, echoing what you're saying, there are a lot of ways to do hard things. And I think that one thing I've noticed is we can increase our window of tolerance, and there's a lot of growth in that. So that's something people can do even in their everyday life in different ways, challenge themselves, get out of their comfort zone, try things that are difficult for them. Don't be afraid to fail. And I see that in my kids, even though probably similar to yours, they have lived a very comfortable life and they haven't had the opportunities we had because of the war in Syria. They haven't been able to go there and travel and spend time, except for when they were very young. When we would go to Syria, we had the experience of, the shower was a tub of water and a little handheld bucket that you would pour over yourself. And that was it. The electricity was cut off often. The water was cut off often. Things that, really, it does change the way that you view life, even till now, even when I'm 50 years old. However, I noticed with my children, at least with my boys, one thing that they have experienced is they push themselves hard in certain things like exercise. They're really into exercise and working out. And they feel like when you push yourself hard at something that's difficult for you and you get out of your comfort zone, you grow. And they've noticed that on their own. I never told them to do that, but they experience that, and it's been a source of empowerment for them and growth. And I think for myself, and I'd like to hear your perspective on this, but being a person who went through medical training, which was very hard, and especially, as I said, having been a new wife and a new mother at that time, and back 20 some years ago, it was very uncommon to have a baby in your residency years and to be breastfeeding. I was full-time breastfeeding, so I was pumping all the time, every 4 hours, and I would, sneak away and hide in call rooms, and they would sometimes bring the baby to me when I was taking every third night call in the hospital so they could pick up the milk and I could nurse her because, we were really trying to offer that breast milk for her. And what I realized is things that came later in my life didn't seem difficult to me because I had done something that was so hard. It was physically hard. It was emotionally hard. It was mentally hard. It's not just the things we know about medical training. Back then, there weren't a lot of rules around the hours that you had, you could work. It wasn't limited. So we'd work so many hours with no sleep, and it was so physically and mentally fatiguing. But then you have to also study. People don't maybe realize we had exams to take and we had to constantly be studying. And then I had a newborn baby at home. I didn't have a live-in nanny or anything like that. I didn't have family around me because medical training often requires you to move to some random place where you matched. And so it really made things seem downhill after that for me. And when I experience hardship now and I see people around me and how they experience it, I realize my window of tolerance is a lot bigger. I think there's some physiology and maybe some genetics and some nature and nurture that goes into that. It's not just because I, went through this thing, but I do think that these types of experiences where they challenge us can increase our window of tolerance, so that when we do face difficulties, which we all will, and we do experience hardship in life, hopefully, inshallah, we can have a bigger window of tolerance with which to manage those. I would love to hear your thoughts on that concept, and also just in terms of how it was for you in terms of your medical training and your experiences through that.
Yeah, I do agree for sure. Like, having kids and being a physician at the same time has given me a lot of stamina and tolerance, like you talk about. I I had my first child when I was a first year fellow, and I didn't have family around because I was in Michigan. Also, like, I was far from my family, and I actually had a lot of complications from that first birth that lasted. Uh, I had a lot of surgical repairs for the first year of of the birth of my first child, and still I have like ramifications that have lasted a lifetime. But again, like, just like you said, like, that does build your tolerance, and it builds your stamina. And I think I look back and like, oh my god, how did I even do that? Like, thinking about having multiple kids, and I didn't have a live-in person in the beginning, and my husband would travel, and I was doing these 24-hour hospitalist shifts, which meant I had to leave the house at like 6:30 in the morning. And if your nanny's calling in sick at 6:30, where are you going with two or three children? And my husband's like in another city. So I remember a lot of times, now they're a little bit older, but I remember a lot of times like telling my nanny, like, I don't care that you're sick, you come with your illness, I need a body at home. Like, there's no place I can, you've already exposed my children, because being an infectious disease person, I knew like things were brewing before. So I'm like, you've already exposed them, I don't care, I need a body, you need to come. And like, that was so stressful. Like, and I feel like people don't understand that level of stress. Like, I'm leaving my house for 24 hours, my husband is not in the city, I don't have someone around, and I need a body to be taking care of my children. So yeah, so that for sure, it does, like, it teaches you so much. And like you, like, I think when we were going to medical school, there weren't a lot of hijabis or Muslim women who were older than us to look up to see what they had done. Actually, all of the hijabi Muslim women physicians I knew, they were in Syria. Like, those are the people I was exposed to. Like, the practicing Muslim women who were doctors were in Syria. They were not here in the United States. So even thinking about like going to the OR with my hijab for the first time, and that experience was like, having to advocate for myself. Like, I ended up using the bearded man hat. Like, I
Me
don't know if you
too.
use
Oh,
that too, because
hated that thing.
yeah, I mean,
So
but
ugly.
at first they told me to just wear a scrub cap and leave an umta on, and then that made me like everybody else, and so it didn't differentiate me in my hijab. And it just, like, the way people treat you is so different
So
when you're not wearing
different.
your hijab, right? Or like when they think you're just the average, like anybody else. It's just so different. And I was like, no, I don't like that experience. I will be the alien spaceman astronaut with the bearded man thing over my hijab, and go back into the OR like that. So there was not a lot of people to
Fascinating.
look up to or get advice from. And it was just, it was such a stressful experience. But like you said, those experiences, they build tolerance, they build character, they build patience, and they teach you that, wow, you can really do hard things. So if you doubt yourself, like now, if I doubt myself, even like writing the book, I was like, oh, I don't know if I can do this. But I always have to convince them, no, Noor, you can do hard things. You did really hard things. You've done really hard things. So just like, go for it.
Yeah, it's really funny that you're talking about the issue of the hijab, and I didn't mention that when I was talking about my medical training, but absolutely, I faced all of that, didn't have any mentors or role models or supporters in that, but I experienced that as well. When I was still a medical student, the first time I had to go in an OR, it was so hard. I was so overwhelmed with how I was going to figure out the hijab thing. How was I going to get sleeves, a jacket, or whatever? And so I did wear an umta and a bonnet, surgical bonnet. And normally I'm really strict about not showing my neck. So this was really, really overwhelming for me. I wore, I think I maybe wore 2 masks or something to cover my neck. I wore the 2 scrub shirts forwards and backwards and all that to cover the V. And we were in this little waiting area before we went into the OR, and there was a young man, just a little bit older than me. Maybe he was from a surgical company, a rep or something. And I was like, why is he being so friendly to me? It was the weirdest thing. I couldn't understand it until it dawned on me when I was walking by and I realized he doesn't know I'm a hijabi Muslim woman. And I'm so used to people treating me a certain way that that was my normal. And I think some of us experience it in Chicago in the winter when we're all decked out in our hats and our scarves, and people, like, one day I was in the grocery store and people were so friendly and I was like, what is going on? And then I caught a glimpse of myself in the window as I was leaving, and I realized they don't know that I'm a hijabi. And I never realized how people treat us so differently if it weren't for those particular experiences. It's extraordinary. It's such a drastic difference that you can't help but notice it. And I think, we like being, maybe at least when it comes to some of the interactions, we like being who we are as Muslim women. We have that externally when we wear a hijab. People interact with us a certain way. So even though there's prejudices, and even though there are stereotypes and there are definitely negative things, the way that people treat us sometimes, that difference, like you said, we're used to it. So we want to be identified that way. We're choosing that. So it's fascinating in the OR when you have those experiences.
Yeah, for sure.
It's interesting. I actually hated the bearded man cap, but I'm in a surgical specialty now and I don't wear it. I'm lucky. I just I have a sports hijab that I wear different sports hijabs and just a bonnet over it, and it's fine. But it's not always the case in all surgical specialties. Some of them, it's much more difficult for the hijabi women. You find ways around it, and I would never use that as a reason to discourage a woman from going into a surgical specialty. Alhamdulillah, for me, it's worked out really well, and I always have a jacket available, and it's just a moment that I have to scrub and get into my gown, that I have my arms exposed. And in ophthalmology, at least, I mean, it's almost always all women in my rooms. So very rarely will I have a male anesthetist, but everybody else in the room, the circulating nurse, the scrub tech, and usually the anesthetists are all women. So I've been really lucky in that regard.
Yeah. I wouldn't discourage someone from going into surgery because of that either. For me, it's just like pediatrics. I felt so at home, and like you, I have times where I have to scrub, like when I go into the NICU and stuff. And now I don't even think twice about it. I just roll up my sleeves, scrub, and move on with my life.
Yeah, subhanallah. It's interesting. I think now that I'm older, the concept of being a working mom, it's challenging. I would never want to minimize that to any young women when they're choosing their life path. It's definitely hard. And just as you said, when we were going through it, it was just pushing through day to day. But when we look back now, and you mentioned that, and it resonated with me, that when you look back now, you see how hard it really was. And when I look back now, I often get really emotional. I get almost like I'm experiencing the pain of that young woman version of myself, differently now. At the time, I couldn't, and I was just trying to live from day to day. It was just so hard. But when I look back now, I get very emotional sometimes, and I feel it's like I'm experiencing that pain that I never allowed myself to experience in those days because I couldn't afford to do that. I had just had to keep pushing through. And I think that is part of our self-growth and becoming more compassionate with ourselves. And maybe we weren't always afforded those opportunities, or maybe we didn't always know that it's okay to be compassionate with yourself, and it's actually good to be compassionate with yourself. And so as I experience that now, I think, wow, I'm surprised when I feel those emotions bubbling up in me. I'm wondering if you ever feel that way when you look back at those difficult years.
Yeah, for sure. And like you felt like you didn't have a choice. There was no room to feel sorry for yourself. You just had to keep going. There was no room to be like, wow, this is really hard. Like you just had to, like you said, like day to day, like, what am I doing today? What am I doing tomorrow? Where are the kids going to be? Where am I going to be? Where, like, who's going to get them where they need to be? And there's no time or space to lament over how difficult your life actually is. You just got to keep going. And so, yeah, like now I look back at it and like think, God, that was crazy. Like that was, especially as women, like we tend to carry the mental load of everything. Even if your husband's working and you're working, women still tend to carry the mental load of the household. Like I know when the doctor appointments are. I know which child needs underwear, which child needs socks, which one grew out of their pants, which one, you know what I'm saying? Like you
Mhm.
have all
I
of
know.
those things, plus your job, plus making sure that there's food at home, plus making sure that the house is clean. I mean, you may not be the one cleaning it, or you may not be the one cooking, but making sure that all of those things are there. Um, it's just a whole different added mental load that I think our counterparts, the men in our lives, maybe don't have no idea. Like just yesterday, I had this conversation with my husband. I've been married for more than 15 years. And I had this conversation with him about how he has no idea what it's like to carry the mental load of representing Muslims everywhere you go, right? Like, because when you're in hijab, you don't cut people off, you don't flick them off, you can't be mean to them, you can't have a bad day, you can't be rude. And like, he has no idea, even though his mom wears hijab, his sister wears hijab. He's been with me for more than 15 years. We always go everywhere we go. I'm in my hijab, but he has no idea what that load is like. And so just going back to the mental load of being a working mom, it's so much more than it's so much more than you think you can handle, and you don't. There's just no time to think about it. You just have to keep going.
Yeah, and not having family nearby, that made it so much harder. I think now that I am trying to plan things in my life in such a way that if my daughter or my sons, but specifically my daughter, because she's a girl and it's a little bit different. If she were to need me, because she's in dental school now, she's not married, but if she were to get to a point in her life where she needed me for help support around having a baby while she's still in her training or early in her career, just like I was, I would want to drop everything and support her. I would want to offer her whatever I could to make it easier for her, because I lived through that and it was so hard. And so I think I often think about that for my career and my future, as how can I make some changes at this point that will allow me to be able to do that for my daughter, assuming that she were to need that or wanted that kind of support.
Yeah, it's definitely something to think about, and definitely something to mentor young women to like think about that, when they're going choosing careers, or or thinking about when they're going to have a child, or what it means to have a child, and be a working mom. And different careers obviously demand different time and different amounts of yourself. But it's definitely something to kind of highlight for them, and our sons too, and ways that they can support their wives, or uh, if they became parents, ways that they can support their significant other in child rearing.
Absolutely. That's something I talk with my boys about a lot. And I'm very open with them about my perspective as a woman, as a mother, as a wife, on all of these various aspects of life. And I hope that they will take that into account when they enter, inshallah, into a relationship with a spouse, and think about how they can support and honor her as well in the way that she deserves. So I think there's always a lot to learn and a lot to share and teach as we go through life and growing. One of the things that really, you alluded to it earlier, and it really, I felt so excited and proud to see, was when you wrote your book. For whatever reason, it's something I've always wanted to do. And so when I saw that you actually did it, despite all the things we've already talked about, being busy with so many things, it really opened my eyes up to the fact that there are things in life you need to just get on and do, and stop just putting them on a bucket list somewhere. So I would love to hear about your experiences around developing the ideas for the book, and then actually just getting it done, writing it, getting it published, and now all the work that you're doing around the book launch and promotion and stuff like that.
Yeah, so I never thought about writing a book. Like, that was never on my radar. And I always knew when I was young that I wanted to be a doctor. Like, since grade 3 or 4, I knew, like, I wanted to be a doctor. My dad was a doctor. I had experienced what a medical life looked like. And so, but writing a book was never like, it just, I don't know. I just, not that I didn't think I was a good writer. I thought I wrote okay, but how you pegged yourself into the science and humanities. I always pegged myself as a science person. And so that wasn't really like on my radar, but uh, I of course, I don't believe in any coincidences. I believe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala places you in different places. And because there's this big plan in life. And even if you look at my resume, my academic resume, you would think like, oh my God, this girl knew from the very beginning that she was going to go into PEDS ID. But that's really not, it's not how it happened. Like if you look at like, I worked at a cellular and molecular biology lab when I was at university. And so if you think about that and you think I ended up in infectious diseases, you're like, oh wow, her trajectory like makes sense, but it was nothing like that. But anyways, so the book, I had no plans of writing a book, but what ended up happening was in March or after I had my baby, my last baby, Kareem, he was a really difficult pregnancy. I was pregnant at 40 years old, which is not really a good age to be having a baby, but it was such a difficult pregnancy. I was so exhausted, so different from all my others. And then when I had him, it was a difficult delivery. And, my obstetrician was like, oh my God, I almost nicked your uterine artery. Oh, you could have bled to death. You would have died, this and that. And it was like, just like, that's not what you want to hear, when you're coming out of the OR. And then he was so colicky for months and months. He was like super colicky. And so I really was having like postpartum blues bordering on depression after I had him. So in the summer, I had him in April, and that winter also like extended on and on in Chicago. You know how our winters are sometimes. And, I was like, oh my God, I'm going to have him in April. It'll be nice and sunny. But no, it wasn't nice and sunny. It was chilly. It was cold. And so in that summer, I told my husband, like, there's something not right about me. I'm not feeling myself. I need some sun. I need something. I need to get out of here. So recognizing that I'm not that person, that's just always like, I'm jetting off on these like spectacular vacations. Like for me to say that to him was like his radars were up. Like, he's like, okay, what do you need? And I'm like, I need to get some sun. So I told him I have a good friend in California. I'm like, I'm going to go to California. I'll take the baby. I need a couple of days. Maybe I'll see some mountains, some beaches, something sun. And he's like, okay. So I went. And when I went there, my friend Hanan, who was hosting me, she's a graphic designer. And she introduced me to this young man named Mukhtar al-Khanshali, who is the subject of a book called The Monk of Mocha, if you've read it.
I haven't read it, but I've heard of it.
Dave Eggers, right. So she knew him, and so she introduced me to him. And just by way of conversation, he's like, "Oh yeah, I just recently had to hightail it out of Yemen. I was stuck there when the war started." And I was like, "Oh, I had to hightail it out of Yemen too." And we had exchanged Yemen war stories. And then I moved on with my life, went back home and whatever. And a year later, Dave Eggers, the famous American author, had written a book about him, and they were doing a book tour together. And so they came to Chicago, and my husband and I had heard about the book tour. So I'm like, hey, let's go to this thing. And so we went, and it was in this downtown location in Chicago, and like some poshy, hotel, or I don't know, some swanky building. And it was like all of these older white people who came to hear Dave Eggers and Mukhtar and about this book. And so there they are, they're doing a slideshow, and Mukhtar's showing all these slides of Yemen and the Yemeni people and the Yemeni crisis. And I'm like, oh my God, like, look at the power of a book. Like, if these people weren't maybe Dave Eggers fans, they maybe would have never been able to identify Yemen on a map. But here they are listening to these stories. And then by then, the Syrian crisis had been going on for like 7 years. And I was like, okay, maybe. Oh, and I had also read the book by Samantha Powers. I don't know if you read this book, but Samantha Powers, the former United States ambassador to the United Nations during the Obama administration, she wrote a book called The Problem from Hell. And it talks about genocides and different genocides, like Rwanda.
I've never read that one.
Bosnia. Yeah, it's kind of depressing, but she talks about Bosnia, Rwanda, and different genocides. And she makes the argument in her book that one of the reasons, or one of the main reasons, that the West, or specifically the United States, don't intervene if there's no national security issue, or if there's no financial issue, is if the people of the United States don't care. So if the United States citizens don't care, then the government's not going to care. But if the citizens kind of wake up and like say something, then the United States government maybe intervenes. So that was the case she was making for Bosnia. Like, the once kind of the situation in the United States came to be at a time where there was so many protests and people were emailing their senators and representatives and the president, blah, blah, blah. That's when finally something kind of happened to end that war in Bosnia. So given those pieces, I was like, oh, maybe if somebody writes something about the Syrian crisis, maybe if someone humanizes the Syrian story, maybe people will pay attention and something will happen in Syria, like something will change in Syria. but I never thought I would write a book. So when we went home from that event, I told my husband, I'm like, maybe if I write something. He's like, yeah, right. And I had blogged before about some of my experiences, like on Facebook and things like that. And
Mhm.
so I started writing, and I would like put the kids to sleep, and every night between like 9 and 11 p.m. I would just write, and I would sit and I'd write and write and write. And 3 months later, it was like a 50,000 word document, which is a book, right? It's 200 pages. So I had this book in 2019. I had finished writing this book, except the last chapter on COVID, obviously. And so in 2019, I had been finished with this book. And again, not coincidentally or coincidentally, however you want to think about it, there was a woman in my working in my hospital who was taking a break. So she's like very driven. And it ended up that we were in the same undergraduate class. We never knew at the University of Chicago. But when I saw her website, she was shaking hands with Bill Clinton, who spoke at my graduation. So I'm like, oh my God, Kathy, we're in the same class. We didn't even know. So my friend Kathy, she was taking a break from academic medicine. She used to work at the University of Chicago. She's a peds ICU physician. And she was like so stressed out and burned out from that. So she came to our hospital, which is a community hospital. We have like an 8-bed ICU. And so for 2 years, she decided to work at our hospital. And she was writing a book. She was writing a book about she had a baby, and she coded during having this baby. So
Wow.
her book was about being on both sides of coding, like being coded as a
Oh.
patient and coding patients as a physician. So she had told me that Harvard does this CME about helping physicians write books and brand themselves and things like that. So she's like, you should go. The hospital will cover it because it's CME. So I'm like, okay. So in June of 2019, I went to this Harvard course, and
Is
I
that
learned
specifically for book writing, or is that the one for leadership and women and healthcare? And maybe that's a different one. I went
it's
to one of
not just
those.
women. It's not just women.
Oh,
So
okay. So
I
that's a
think
different one.
I forget what the course was called, but it's
Hmm.
more about like branding and writing books. And so they
Okay.
round up all these agents too who help you
Oh.
figure out how to write how to write your pitch and how to write like a book proposal. So, and I'm like super introverted and shy, and so like this experience was so like, oh my God. And but I learned a lot, and I learned about pitches, and I learned how to write a book proposal. And so I did pitch to a few agents while I was out there, but everybody rejected my idea. Like, and then I when I came home, I refined the proposal, and I refined a couple of chapters, and I looked into like, so the historic way of people writing books would they find an agent, and then the agent pitches you to a big publishing company. So I got this book of like different agents, and it requires a lot of research. So like you want an agent who's interested in your subject, or who may have like published a book about your subject, or anyways. So I would find all these agents, and I would email like 20 at a time. I would send them my pitch, and I'd be like, I wrote this book on blah blah blah. And the nice ones would say no thank you, but most of them would just like not even reply back to me. So then I would be
Mm.
like, this is so stupid. I'm not a writer, I'm a physician, I'm going to go back to my day job. And I'd just be like, this is so dumb. And then something would happen in Syria, or my husband would be like, but you already wrote it. But mostly something would happen in Syria, like the use of chemical weapons, or a hospital would be bombed. And I'd be
Mm.
like, oh my God, no, I gotta do this. And I would keep praying istikhara too, because like I pray
Mhm.
istikhara all the time. So then I would do the same thing. I'd find 20 other agents. I'd be and I went through the cycle. And then COVID hit, right? So March of 2020 now. So this has been like about a year of me trying to do this. And then I'm like, this is really dumb now. I'm really tabling this project. I need to make sure that my family survives COVID. And I just put it away. And then in September of 2022, one of my former roommates, who knew I was writing this book, she's like, "Oh my God, did you listen to this podcast?" I'm like, "Come on, I mean, I do know, if I have a free minute, I'm not listening to a podcast." Like, no offense, right? But if I have a free minute, I'm gonna do something that's like turning my brain off. So I don't watch documentaries, and I don't listen to podcasts. So I mean, I do sometimes, but not it's not a regular habit of mine. So anyway, so she's like, "No, no, listen to this podcast. Like, I think that you'll appreciate this pharmacist. She turned publisher. Maybe she'll be interested in your book." So I'm like, okay, whatever, like send it to me. So it was Mommying While Muslim podcast. I don't know if you've
Oh,
heard
I
about
know
them.
it. Yeah, yeah. I've
Yeah.
actually been on their podcast. I was a guest on it
Yeah.
before.
Yeah. So I listened to their podcast, and this is they had hosted a publisher named Janan Sarwar. She's a pharmacist. She's a PhD in pharmacy, who had been working in the pharmacy publishing industry for 7 years, and then she had 3 kids, decided to open a publishing house, a small little publishing house, to kind of promote diverse voices.
Mm.
So So I sent her my pitch thinking like she's not going to respond either, or she's going to be say, no, no, thank you. What? Nobody wants to read a sad story about Syrian refugees. But within 12 hours, she's like, let's meet. And we met, and she's like, oh my God, I love your story. Like, I love the the proposal of it. Let me see your, I said I already have a manuscript, and in that time I had written one last chapter about COVID, and I feel like that's why I didn't publish. Like, I needed to write that chapter about COVID.
Oh,
That's why in
subhanallah.
those few years I didn't. So, anyways, and so then the rest of this history. So I mean, I had so much trepidation, and it was, if it wasn't for the earthquake that hit in February,
Hmm.
I probably would have just been like, I don't know, Janine. Like after all of the steps, I
Hmm.
kept being like, oh my God, I don't know, it's exposing so much. Like, I'm so introverted, I'm just gonna put myself out there. And but that earthquake like was like, okay, no, no, like I just feel like I saw Allah's hand in every step, and like that earthquake was the final like push to just
Hmm.
to just publish. So it's been an
SubhanAllah, that
interesting journey.
earthquake was just, it was awful, especially for those of us who have worked there. You know, the
Mm.
people that we had just left Turkey maybe weeks before the earthquake, and doing relief work in the same exact region where it hit. So it was so devastating. I just,
Yeah.
it was very hard to see the not only the people that we were helping, but the people that work on the staff of the charity were hit. They lost their homes, they lost family members, and it was so devastating to see it from their perspective as well. So subhanallah, every time we see one of these huge crises, even now when we're seeing happen in Gaza, there are these aspects of these silver linings, that we're, I think, surprised by, but we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always has his plan, and whatever outcome he chooses will happen. So I guess you could say that was a silver lining, is that you got that final push to get your book out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how has
Yeah.
it been now with since the book has been published? How was it received, and have you had any interesting feedback or things that surprised you by maybe people that like it might not surprise you if somebody like me reads your book, which I loved it, by the way, and I was very inspired by that, and somebody like me. But what about somebody maybe who you wouldn't expect to read your book or resonate with it or be impacted by it?
I mean, definitely like coworkers or people who work in the hospital with me. Again, like I mentioned, like I'm very introverted, so a lot of them had no idea that I did this other stuff, or
Oh,
that there's like this whole other side of my life that's like not my children and the hospital where I work. So like the chairman of pediatrics in my hospital is an older Jewish man, and he read the book and he was just like so blown away. Um, so you know, it's been interesting, like thinking about, I didn't know that I also had to market the book, so I'm like,
yeah.
I wrote the book and now it's like I'm the marketer, I'm like the everything, like, so it's just like that's so not my I'm not into advertising, I'm not very good, I'm not like a good business person, so learning about that stuff and like thinking about ways that I can promote my, and the self promotion is very difficult for me too, like, so that it's just
Hmm.
like it's such a weird space to be in,
Yeah.
but my publisher always reminds me, or to she's like, it's about the message, it's not about you, it's not about you, stop thinking about it, it's not about you, it's about the message. And it's like, yeah, okay, so that helps me in trying to do things to promote the book. But I've met a lot of people along the way, and like I did a book festival in Louisville a couple of weeks ago, which was
Oh, in
very interesting.
Louisville,
Also,
Kentucky.
yeah, in
Wow.
Louisville, Kentucky. Yeah, so I met a lot, like, that I think I was the only Muslim there, like as an author. And it was just, I like, for me, it's just it really is like trying to open people's eyes and minds about Muslims and
Hmm.
who Muslims are. Like, even again yesterday, I don't know why I had this like aha realization, but even like your post about your 50th birthday, I was thinking about like these last 2 or 3 decades of my life, I've had to keep um proving that I'm not a terrorist. Like, I feel like I've had to spend 3 decades of my life proving that I am not a terrorist, or like
Yeah.
that I'm actually a good human being.
Yes.
And yesterday, the United States uh, rejected the Security Council. They vetoed voting on us stopping the ceasefire.
Yeah.
And all last night, like, I'm tossing and turning in bed, thinking the government of the United States is the maybe the biggest, like producer of terrorists, like Vietnam War, Iraq War. voting against a ceasefire. And instead, in the last 3 decades, I felt like I have to prove that I'm not a terrorist. Where I've been in medicine for 2 or 3 decades, saving lives now, but thinking that like trying to reprocess, like I'm a good person, like I am a good human being.
Absolutely.
And then here's my government trying to make me feel like I'm a terrorist, where they've been bombing and killing people
And
for decades.
warmongering and proxy
Yeah,
warring and
and can't even get some gun control policy in this country, where we're not having to deal with mass shootings left and right and center in theaters and schools.
schools.
Right. So it's like, it's just, I don't know. It's,
Well, you know what I realized one day, and very similar to what you're saying, is that I was like, American Muslims are like the best thing to happen to America. Like the majority of us are such good people. We're so God-fearing. We care about other people. Many of us are in careers where we're taking care of others. I mean, more and more now, and maybe because we're in Chicago, but like any hospital, if you see the call board, especially during the holiday seasons and stuff, it's all Muslim names.
yeah,
People are everywhere I go. I realize like the Muslims we're doing really good work. And on top of that, like on top of what we do in terms of our careers and how we conduct ourselves, like you said, as a hijabi woman, I'm very cognizant of the fact that I try to be always on my best behavior with people, smiling and holding doors and being kind, even if I don't even feel up to it on that particular day. But aside from all of that, I just think because of our religion and what it teaches us, when somebody greets you, you should greet them with something better. When someone is, unkind to you, you should be patient. You should give people 70 excuses for their bad behavior. I mean, there's so many things that teach us to be peace loving, to be kind, to always try to take the higher ground and stuff. And I think it's really ironic that we're painted with a negative brush when really
yeah,
the majority of what we offer in this nation is actually extremely positive. And I wish that people could realize that is the majority of us. We're not exceptions. You and we're not exceptions. I will say, like, my group of Muslim women friends and my larger sense of community, I'm talking just about the women, but it's the same for the men, are extraordinary human beings. And we are doing so much in our own communities as Muslims. Like, we have to build our Islamic schools and our mosques. And then on top of that, we've got our relief work that we all are trying to do to help the nations that we maybe originated from, or, other Muslim countries. So we're funding projects here. We're funding projects that we feel are beneficial in other places. We're trying to help within many Muslims are doing work outside of the Muslim community. They're doing food drives and medical drive, all kinds of things that serve just the entire community, Muslim or non-Muslim. We're doing all of those things in addition to, as I said, the type of work that we do, whether it's in our careers or people. So many friends of mine are involved in, school boards and library boards, in the public school system, and they're the mom of their child's classroom or whatever. Like, they're contributing in so many different ways. It's a lot, and on top of all of that, we still have to assert ourselves and say, we're not bad people. It's really, it can really be frustrating. And I try not to ever let that get to me, because I'm a firm believer that each and every one of us can only be responsible for our own behavior. We cannot control how other people act. We can only control how we respond to it. And frankly, we cannot control anything that happens to us in our life, because that's chosen by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the true test in it for us is how we respond to everything that happens in our life. And that's all we can do, is try to do our best in that regard.
yeah.
SubhanAllah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us stronger and more able. It's interesting that when you refer to yourself, you talk about being an introvert and these things, but what I've seen from you in these recent years has been a lot of public work and a lot of advocacy. And even when I see you on social media, you are always advocating for causes that are important to you. And I think you do a lot of good work and you reach a lot of people. So although you may feel that way, and it's definitely, you may be pushing yourself out of your comfort zone in that regard, but I think you're making an impact. And I wonder how you feel about the type of activism that you do outside of everything you've already shared, specifically when it comes to social media?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is pushing myself out of my comfort zone. And like, even when I tell my husband things like, I'm going to go speak at this, like he laughs at me because he knows how uncomfortable I am and how it's just like, I hate public speaking. These things make me sick to my stomach. And had do it had it not been for how strongly I believe in some of these messages, like there's no way you would get me to, public speak, or even like social media. Like I don't even take pictures. I hardly take any pictures, but here I am. I found Instagram. I don't know why I like Instagram the most out of all of the social media platforms. I don't know, but now I'm thinking I'm going to move to TikTok, which is a thing that I never thought in my wildest dreams.
Yeah.
But just seeing what's happening, and the censorship on different platforms, and thinking maybe TikTok is the most uncensored. But anyways, like I hardly take pictures, and again, my publisher, in preparation for publication, she made me meet with a social media guru who like gave me all of these different ideas. And again, had it not been for the book or the message of the book, like there's no way I would be on Instagram or Facebook, or I mean maybe on Facebook because you just like write whatever, but like public pictures and all of that stuff, it's just not me. It's not my personality. But I definitely believe that people can't see what they can't be what they can't see, as they say. Like, so people cannot imagine themselves as a working Muslim woman or a strong Muslim woman if they can't see that, So it's definitely the image of a hijabi woman doing different things has a profound impact on the psyche of whether it's a Muslim or somebody who's not Muslim, to see someone like me or you out there in the public space doing difficult things. Just yesterday I was looking at pictures with my kids. So every night I lay down with them, the younger ones, and we look at pictures that show up on my Google Photos. And one of them was me in Yemen, surrounded by the military. It was like just me. I'm the only woman, and there's all these military guys. And my son Zaid, who's 9 now, but he was like 4 at the time, so obviously he had no idea. He's like, "Mama, why are you in the army?" And I'm like, "I wasn't in the army." He's like, "Well, why are you surrounded by all these army people?" I'm like, "Those were our protective gear people who traveled with us wherever we went in Yemen." But I just think that it's powerful and it needs to be seen. I wish it wasn't me. I wish it was somebody else, but I just feel I feel obliged, I feel obliged to do some of these things, because I think that the tide has to turn. Like, we cannot keep saying that, well, we're just painted as terrorists and just kind of put our heads in the sand and just move on with our lives, Like, it has to change for my children for sure. I feel like I would not accept that.
Inshallah. Yeah, when I wrote that post that we weren't always terrorists, my son, who's 20 now, Kareem, I also have a Kareem, he said, "Yeah, I don't relate to that at all. We were always terrorists." Like, in their lifetime, it was different. There was a time in my life where people didn't look at me that way. It was different. It's changed a lot in these years. And, that's what I was conveying in the post. But I definitely relate to your feelings about social media. Sometimes when I'm places with friends, they're like, "Oh, you take a picture because you're good at that stuff." And I'm like, I am not at all good at that. I don't even know how to take a picture or pose for a picture. I'm super awkward. And I'm not on social media because I want to post pictures of myself. That's never, the only reason I started was very similar to what you're saying. I had attended a course at Harvard also for women in healthcare. And it was about leadership. And there was a separate program specifically regarding finding your own place online, like doing an audit of yourself online. And it had some parts about social media, and it's what kind of got me motivated to experiment with it. And that was in 2019. I didn't even have the Instagram app. I had Facebook, but I didn't have Instagram. I was way behind on all of that. So it was a real learning journey. And my journey began with a group of female physicians, all non-Muslims for the most part. There were some Muslims, but the majority were not. And so we would all post and kind of encourage and support each other. Those are really nice times, actually. A lot of that has fallen away now, but it was I was always sort of whatever they were posting about, if there was a certain theme we were all posting about, I was always sort of choosing to represent the Muslim woman, hijabi Muslim physician, perspective on it. And I loved those days because back then, it's before Reels, and Instagram was a lot about the caption. You would just post whatever picture. I hated that part, putting a picture of myself. But the caption was what I really liked. I liked the writing part of it. It got me reflecting on a lot of things regarding my own experiences. And I felt like I was reaching people who had never heard the perspective of a Muslim woman. So from that perspective, it was really nice. As my account kind of evolved and changed, it became more geared towards other Muslim women. And so there's a lot less outreach to the non-Muslim community, although definitely some of them still do follow me and interact with my posts, but not nearly as much as it used to be. Sometimes I miss that because I think it was sort of a nice, unique aspect to it. But there's definitely so much room for advocacy and education in whatever realm, whether it's with Muslims, whether it's with non-Muslims, whether it's specifically about being a physician or just being a woman or whatever element of our life. So it kind of evolves for me. I just kind of roll with it, whatever it is. But it's definitely not natural for me. It's not something I would choose for myself to put myself out there. I'm pretty guarded about sharing too much very personal stuff. My kids definitely don't want me to share them on social media. I'm pretty cautious about that. I don't share anything about, my husband or my marriage or things like that. That's not the type of things that I tend to post about. Although I think some people want that. People were like, always ask me, can you talk about marriage and parenting, whatever? And I'm like, that's not my area that I really want to post about. But it for whatever reason, I feel like I was given this platform. I was sort of thrown into it. And whenever I go through phases where I just want to walk away from it, which is often, and I'll take breaks for long periods of time, sometimes months, I always feel like, okay, when you have a platform, you can advocate for things and you can reach more people. And there's a bit of a duty in that. And so I try that's really the main reason that I try to stick with it, is because sometimes somebody needs me to promote something. They ask me because they know I have a platform, and there's something about that has value. So I'm always making dua and asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide me and to not let me do things in the way that would displease him with regards to everything, but specifically when it comes to social media. I do a lot of dua about that because I don't want to fall into the obvious traps that people fall into. I don't want it to be something that takes me down a path that I would have never intended for myself. And, that's often how things go in life. We kind of very slowly and very gradually get off track. And before we know it, we've veered into a completely different direction. So in that way, I do try to be cognizant of that. I try to be purposeful and try to depend on my dua. And also nasiha. I have had friends over the years who have given me very frank nasiha regarding things I've posted and asked me to modify things or remove certain pictures and things. And I've appreciated that. I think it's not an easy thing to do for a friend. And I've appreciated that from them. I know they did it for sincere intentions. And so I try my best to be cautious about stuff like that. But I know I make a lot of mistakes, as we all probably do sometimes in life.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely like I feel like you could like just it could be such an ego trap, and so I also like try to, kind of just I mean, since the stuff in Gaza, it just hasn't been in me to say anything except reposting or you know talking about what's happening on the medical front in Gaza. I just have not, and it's funny because I'm gaining followers. I don't even know how. It's like it's just such a weird, but it is easy to kind of lose sight of where you started or why you started this thing. And I just pray Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect me and my heart and all of that stuff. And also just like you, I pray istikhara all the time, and I always make that dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shows me what's truth as truth and what's falsehood as falsehood, and just like not let me kind of delude myself into thinking I'm doing something good when I know inside that it's like for another reason.
That's a good. I love that dua. I added it into my daily adhkar. So when I do my morning adhkar, I just kind of appended that on because I always want to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, show us the truth for truth, and help us to follow it, and show us falsehood for falsehood and help us to avoid it. Because I think that is the nature of the world that we're in. And when we see that with the war in Gaza, I mean, it's like truth is falsehood and falsehood is truth. It's the weirdest thing. It's like you're living in an alternate reality. And I think that is actually much more the way of the world than we might realize. We can't be naive. And I think that's why one of the reasons that dua is so critical to always make.
Yeah.
May Allah accept it from us and guide us. So as we close, I had a couple questions I wanted to close with and kind of get your personal take on some things. So one of the things I've been reflecting on is, and maybe it is because of my age and I recently turned 50, is the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, where he says, take advantage of 5 before 5, your youth before your old age, your health before your sickness, your wealth before your poverty, your free time before your busyness, and your life before your death. And I'm wondering for you at this particular stage in your life right now, is there one of those that you maybe feel resonates the most with you, or that you're most focused on, youth or health or wealth or free time or life in general to take advantage of?
Definitely my health. I think, I'm in my mid-40s. My kids are still young, so I don't have the free time before the busyness. I'm actually in the busyness part of it, and I'm hoping as they get. It's gotten better because my youngest now is 5 and he's a lot more independent. But I am thinking a lot about my health, and I keep having this conversation with my husband, like, we're not going to be this young and healthy for much longer, so we really need to take advantage. And I've been trying to go on another medical mission, but actually what's grounding me now is my kids. My older kids are like, are you crazy, mama? Like I've been trying to go to Gaza for a really long time, way before this war started. Everybody who's asked me before this war started, where's your next trip going to be? It's always been Gaza. It's been Gaza for so long. And, I have my husband, they're like, well, how about all of these other places? Because it's like, Gaza is not safe. It's not, before this, it wasn't safe.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, no, I don't know what it is, but there's such a strong desire in my heart to go to Gaza. But anyways, even when the earthquake hit, I was trying to go to Turkey, but my eldest son, who's 15 now, he's like, what? You want me to wear a seatbelt when I drive, and you're going to go to Turkey where the buildings are still falling? And that's really like stopped me in my tracks, because like I can't have my son not wear a seatbelt when he drives. You know what I'm saying? So, I am like really itching to go or do something else, but I have to respect that my children are getting older now, and they're using my logic against me in some ways. But yeah, definitely, I really am thinking about my health and my youth, because we're not getting younger, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So the last thing I wanted to ask you is, we know in Islam the hadith about how the consistent deeds are important, even if they're small. And I'm wondering, what are 3 things that if you do them in a day, you feel that you accomplished at least your fundamental things in that day? Like your 3 sort of basic things that you want to make sure you do each day.
Qiyam, like at least 2 rak'ahs of Qiyam.
So before Fajr, like Tahajjud time.
And then reading a juz of Quran. Those are, and then just like making sure I prayed all my salahs, alhamdulillah, I'm pretty consistent with the salahs. The Quran is like hit and miss, and Qiyam is hit and miss, but when I feel like I got all those 3, I definitely feel the barakah of it. Like I feel like, oh my God, this has been a good day. And if I reflect on like, God, why did I have a bad day today? It's usually like, oh my God, I didn't read any Quran today, so tomorrow I should read some Quran, so those are like my 3.
MashaAllah, those are beautiful. You can't argue with those. They're all excellent things and fit beautifully in the theme of prayer, purpose, and people, because the prayer element is those fundamental ibadats that we want to make sure to do on a consistent basis. They really do impact us in a beautiful way. And I think we might sometimes underestimate that. And so when you make them a part of your life regularly, you feel their absence when you miss them. So alhamdulillah for that. Alhamdulillah for the blessing of having this beautiful way of life that Islam guides us to try to strive to live. That's, I think that is really the thing that guides us and inspires us to try to do all of the things that we've discussed and shared in this conversation. Ultimately, it's trying to live in a way that we feel is valuable, that we feel will help us to earn God's pleasure and help us to, inshallah, have a better afterlife through Allah's generosity, not through any of our own accomplishments, but we try our best.
Yep, I mean.
Ameen, Ya Rab. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Nour. It was so nice talking to you. And inshallah, I hope that we can continue this conversation a future day, inshallah.
Inshallah. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I
My
appreciate the
pleasure.
conversation as well.